Hey, welcome back to another episode of EdGems. This is our February episode, and I am so glad to have with us Darius Sawyers. He is the Teach for America Indy Chief of Strategy. Darius, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's dive right in. How did you make your way through your education career into the role that you have now, the Chief of Strategy at TFA?
Yeah, I think my journey into education is one that is very, I would say, typical for Teach for America alum and core members. I myself, like you said, work at Teach for America. I'm our chief strategy officer. So when I think about my role to that opportunity, I went to IU for undergrad. When I was at IU, I thought that I was going to dental school. I was pre-dental, took a lot of science classes, applied, got into dental school. I thought I was going to either IUPUI or Tufts. Like that was my senior year's spring decision. I met a great recruiter through Teach for America, and she just told me like about what could be from students who look like me, who are from neighborhoods like mine, and what it meant for me to be in front of them teaching them every single day. So I went to a visit just to check out some schools that Teach for America was working with in Indianapolis, and I really just fell in love. That day we went to Arlington, and I'm familiar with IPS because I'm a K-12 IPS product myself. So we went over to Arlington. I toured with a student that day, and I said, "Man, dental school can wait for a little bit." So I officially signed up to do my 2-year commitment. I taught at Fall Creek Academy as a charter on the near west side. It's closed now, but did that 2 years, loved it even more, and decided dental school could wait even further. And fast forward, few different jobs later, I'm start back on with the organization that I started with, just doing all our strategy work for the city.
Now, TFA's core mission is to find, develop, and support a diverse network of leaders working together to end educational inequity. A lot of times, when people look at that core mission and they think about the fact that you just stated that TFA is a 2-year commitment, people wonder about, is the bigger picture something else and not having quality teachers in the classroom for a longer period of time? What do you say to that particular pushback to TFA's work?
Yeah, honestly, I would say Teach for America is a leadership development organization. That talent starts in the classroom, and then from there, when people are done with their 2-year commitment, a lot really stay. I think right now in Indianapolis, we are batting around like 60+% of those core members when they finish their second year stay at their placement school, or maybe transition to a different school, but stay in the classroom. So we're really proud at those percentages of teachers who stay in the classroom. But then even from there, those who might think about doing something else, when we start looking at like the education adjacent work, so we start looking at opportunities to work at the Department of Education or work for the Office of Education and Innovation, OEI, or doing policy work related to education. Really, the vast majority of our core members are doing, whether they're directly in the classroom, doing education adjacent things that are still impacting kids on a daily basis. So that's the piece that feels really good. Like we're excited. We have over 800 alumni that's still in Indianapolis doing educational related work, and that's just that's something we're real proud of because ultimately, whether that core member's there for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, they're really giving their all during that time frame. And I can't go into the depth of it right now, but we're real excited about a potential study that's coming out soon that's just going to speak to the impact of Teach for America teachers in classrooms. So just excited about that study as we get to dig into it more. And hopefully we can speak about that more here soon when the results are published.
All right, thanks for that information. You mentioned that you are a product of the Indy school system, and you also mentioned that you did your TFA work here in Indy. Many times, my understanding is that people get placed in other cities. So, is that I guess, how did you end up in Indianapolis when a lot of people normally don't get placed in the city that they live in, which is my understanding?
Yeah, I would say, and your understanding isn't necessarily wrong at all. I think historically that had been like a trend or like a, just something that was kind of typical. I would say since the pandemic, one thing that we're realizing is people are, and I wasn't during the pandemic, so I probably was kind of atypical back when. Now, though, I will say a lot of our core members are staying almost like regionally. So a lot of people who are signing up to do Teach for America in Indianapolis, for example, either A, have Indianapolis-based roots, or they have family in like the Midwest, so Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, etc. So I would say locally, the pandemic is really putting people in more of like a regional kind of mindset, which has been really cool because that in the long run, we really feel is going to just help our core members stay in classrooms and stay in education even that much longer, just because they're already at home. They already are in a space where they know and they're familiar, or that 2 hour drive back to Cincinnati to see mom and dad. It's okay. Like they're not having to make a decision like, hey, I need to move back to California. Um, Otherwise, I'm getting homesick. So excited about the shift that's happening in the applications. Though we are always excited if somebody decides like, hey, I want to move from Florida to Indy. Like, hey, we're gonna take you as well. So
No, that's good to hear because as a person that's coached people that's been in TFA and been an administrator of people for TFA, I know many of the people that we ended up hiring told me point blank that after these 2 years, I was going to go back to the state I was from. And
yeah,
so for me, even if that person stayed in education, when they went back to their home state, it's like, man, we invested 2 years in this person and they left, and
yeah,
to kind of, you almost feel like you're growing somebody. And there's a point, I'm because both of us have had different careers in education,
yeah,
there's a point where you grow somebody and you want them to fly out the coop, but it's like after 2 years you kind of hope they would stay a little bit longer after you put all that time, because I think regardless of your teaching background, your first 2 years is not like, I even think about it because I had my first 2 years of teaching. I'm like, whew,
mhm,
some of the things I would do differently if I could go back and reteach those students. So I am glad to hear that there was a silver lining with the pandemic, that people are able to stay closer to home, which probably speaks to what you said about the retention rate
yeah.
being 60% because people are closer to home. So speaking of teachers and speaking of the classrooms, in your work as chief of strategy, what do you do? How does that tie into what happens in the classroom? And then also, how does that tie into, as you mentioned, the educational adjacent work?
Definitely, yeah. So, as a chief strategy officer, a lot of my work is centered around our big rock or our big goal, around what we call our 2030 goal. So, TFA has a 2030 goal for Indianapolis, and that goal is to double proficiency rates for iLearn for third grade reading, fourth grade math, eighth grade math, and to accelerate college readiness going rates. So the reason we picked third grade reading and fourth grade math and eighth grade math is a lot of like research and studies, and those are just like some key indicators to just show if a student is on a trajectory towards economic mobility as they get older. So that's where those three indicators specifically come from. But that's really a lot of my work, working along school leaders, working alongside policymakers, working alongside community stakeholders to just be part of the solution to get us to what we call 2030. So 2030 in the TFA office is almost like um, it's like an action verb. It's like this thing that we're all doing because like the work matters. So I spend a lot of my time alongside school leaders, just trying to help them, just be thought partners around like what does it mean to just accelerate learning in your school. I spend a lot of time, supporting and hearing policies. Like I know I've spent some time recently. Obviously, right now we're in session with the legislator,
Mhm.
so just going to the House and hearing like, hey, what's going on in the Education Committee? What bills are they hearing today? What's being sent on, et cetera. It's kind of at the heart of what I do on the day-to-day basis, and it's exciting work. Like I before joining TFA was a school leader at Paramount for a while, and I love that work. I opened a school at Paramount, and when I think around like what kind of work would have been able to pull me away from that dedication from a space that I opened, honestly, it was the excitement of what could be in this role. So love what I do, love the people we work with, and I'm honestly just humbled to see a lot of good schools in Indianapolis because there's really some cool things going on in our schools.
Well, speaking of the legislative session, which has been quite interesting this session, what
Yes.
are some bills, policies, topics, issues that either yourself or TFA has really had an eye on, either whether it is in support or potential concern?
Yeah, I would say one that we are deeply in support on that I'll note is don't have the number right in front of me, but the House bill relating to 21st century scholars and and being an automatic enrollment. Again, when I think around like what our 2030 goal is, one of those goals is to increase sign up rates of 21st century and FAFSA completion rates. So obviously that is a 2030 directly aligned goal to just automatically enroll students. So love that. We think it's going to do some great things for just the college going rates of Hoosiers in the state. So we're excited about that. Also, there's a bill that speaks to being able to provide scholarships to students who are interested in education. They're saying it's a $10,000 scholarship. They're just excited about that work so we can get more people in education, especially our BIPOC individuals who in urban ed are just reflected more in our students. So the more teachers we can get, especially Black and Brown teachers, the better. So really love um, those two policies.
So you mentioned being a principal and you mentioned being a thought partner to principals. What issues, thinking about the 2030, how do you work with principals? Can you like tell us maybe like what a day in your life looks like when you're sitting down with the principal? Like what things are you trying to get them to kind of maybe do differently, rethink differently to help you guys meet those goals that you stated earlier in regards to the 2030?
Yeah, I would say this work right now is definitely a marathon and not a sprint. And I say that because like I've been in this role since August, so a lot of my time since then, excuse me, a lot of the time since then has been just seeing great schools and just seeing who's doing what, right? So coming in, taking a tour of a school, just getting a feel for all the things that make that school very unique, and especially whether it's a charter school, innovation school, IPS school, like a lot of schools just have very unique pieces to their model that make them them. So it's just been really cool to just see everything that people have going on. But just while I'm there, just really getting a feel for what is their appetite or current drive towards where their school currently is academically, and just what is their appetite to continually and how aggressive do they want to be to like ramp those numbers up. So honestly, right now it's kind of in the fill it out kind of phase, and just trying to see like where people are and their appetite to grow. But ultimately, some of the things that we are doing is we have started, for example, a Oselo Mino, which is a spin-off from Melanated Leaders, which is a other side, which is a group of principals in the cities and that are really focused on their iLearn data. So there's about 10 different principals in the group, and we have quarterly meetings to go over our beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of year data, and really just dig deep on like how we can get ready for the next testing cycle, ultimately leading up into iLearn. And then it's just an awesome like sharpening iron kind of space where leaders are just helping other leaders just be thoughtful about what's working for them in their spaces as they get their kids ready for iLearn.
Well, since you went down the path about melanated leaders and you
Yeah,
have the shirt on,
got
I
it.
have been to a few melanated leader events.
Yeah.
Nothing recently. It was probably pre-pandemic.
Okay.
So I'm assuming if you got the swag, you're part of the organization. So can you talk to us a little bit about what melanated leaders is for people in the audience that don't know,
Yeah.
and how are you plugging into the work in addition to the example that you just provided?
Yeah, like the obviously the essentially the iLearn consultancy is one space that Melanated Leader does, but Melanated Leaders is really just a space, it's a bonding space, if you will, a cultivating space for just leaders of color. It's that simple. I would say and I might be saying this officially incorrectly, but I would say for me, it's a space it's kind of like a combination of a social space, for people to get together, just talk around like, hey, what's going on in our spaces? Like one thing that I realized as the principal for a while is like there's only one me in a building. So like when I think about my lived experience as a principal, when I think around like what thought partnership looks like, it's not talking sometimes to those people in the building because they just don't sit in my seats. So sometimes it's nice to just have other people who sit in a similar seat to be able to just have a thought partnership around. So some of those times we just get together just socially just to connect and network. Other times there are professional developments that are held, similar to the principal I Learn consultancy group that we have going on. We might bring in other speakers or leaders to just present or provide PD to the group. So it's really just this nice mixture of social / professional development for leaders of color.
Well, that's great to hear. So, if anybody's out there looking for a group like that to join, we have something here in the city. So, thank you for that little promotion for
Definitely.
melanated leaders and how it
Definitely.
has benefited you. But getting back to TFA,
Yeah.
you talked about some of the things that you've been able to do so far, and I know you've only been in your role since August. What has been some of the roadblocks that you have come across so far, either directly in your work as chief of strategy or just with the organization as a whole, as it's trying to impact what's happening in the classroom and in the educational adjacent spaces?
Yeah. I would say the biggest thing is like when I think around like the 2030 goal of wanting to double I learn proficiency rates for those three areas and thinking around 21st century scholar signups and FAFSA, it's just a big, lofty goal. And it's one that we can reach and it's one we're going to reach, but it's one that it just takes a lot of collaboration and thought partnership around it. Like one thing that's just a pivot that I'm having to do is when I was, the principal of my building, that was my building, that was my domain. And everything that functioned in that building was something, it kind of reminded me of like driving a speedboat. Like if I needed to pivot, I could pivot real easy. And like most of the people that was on that boat, they pivoted as well and said, hey, that's the direction we're going in. And it was, just a smoother path to the finish line. But now when I think around the work that I do as chief strategy officer, we are now driving just a larger boat, similar to, let's say, the Titanic. It's just a larger ship. Takes a lot more to steer it. Takes a lot more to just get it to where it needs to be. So that's just part of it's not, I wouldn't say a robot, but just a new challenge that I'm excited to tackle in this role. But I know it's possible because, the more and more coalition building we can do, the more engaging we can get people to get on this road, the better we'll be. And, one thing I realize is just people are just at different spaces of their readiness to be all in. And that's okay. So it's really our goal to continue to be thought partners with them and ask them and support them to get them fully on board just where we need them to be.
What do you wish people understood more about TFA? Because in my space, and the conversation I've had with multiple people, no matter what background, you like it or you don't. There seems to hardly be this little gray space in the middle. So for the people who are like way over there, like what do you wish they would understand? And then the people who support it but still question it, because your bigger issue is like I was traditional trained, like I went to school to be an educator, 4 years at Purdue. No offense to you being at IU.
That's okay.
But there are people like, well, why can't we just help people go through the university for 4 years and get an education degree to be educators? So I know I threw a lot at you, but what do you wish people really understood better about TFA, whether that's the organization nationally or even locally here in the Indianapolis space?
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, we could always use more educators going through the traditional pipeline of 4-year degrees, major in education. Let's go do our 1-year internship and our student teaching, and then boom, we're ready to rock and roll. Like, listen, if that pipeline was getting it done and there was no need for secondary teacher prep programs, hey, I think that's a beautiful place to be. So I think one is just, TFA, we aren't a silver bullet to just try to solve the um, teacher pipeline concerns or even leadership concerns. Like we are just one part of the puzzle, you know. And if when I think around like what we are as an organization, a lot of that is, we are in spaces that are inviting us, which is beautiful. So like when I think around like the schools that we're in, a lot of our schools are very concentrated and are asking us for more and more TFA teachers. So I would say the community around the spaces that we're in, it's very beautiful, very inviting. Like honestly, we just don't even have enough teachers for ourselves to feel the need in the teacher shortage. So for us, we just want to be part of the solution. Like whether you hate or love TFA, ultimately we can all agree that what all kids deserve is happy teachers, teachers that are going to push their students to be better, teachers that care about the academic outcomes for their students, and teachers who are going to be just part of a community and contribute accordingly. So like I think we can all agree on that North Star, and we can all agree that we just don't have enough bodies today to meet the teacher shortage that is true in our city and a lot of cities in across the country. So like I think we just got to bond together and make it about the students, right? And do this work for them, because if there was no need for, let's say, a secondary prep program like TFA, and they were traditionally coming through the pipeline, I think that'd be a beautiful place to be.
Well, I do think you did make one solid point about the fact that, and I think some people don't know this, so I want to reiterate this, that TFA doesn't just show up to school buildings. People invite them there.
Yeah.
So when, and I don't know how to say that because, most of my career, I've been in traditional public schools, but I have worked at 2 charter schools and I was administrator at a charter school. And so like there is a clear relationship. The TFA people come, they check on you. We also had a relationship with ITF. They come and talk to you, and then they provide you with resumes. They provide you with people. And I think sometimes people have this misconception that, like, I don't know what people think, but there is a misconception. So it's like, I think sometimes, regardless how people feel, because I also understand that this interview probably won't sway anybody one way or another.
True.
But I also will say, I think sometimes the energy about people's position is misdirected because essentially, as you said, you are a piece of the pie, and this piece of the pie wouldn't be able to exist if people weren't using it as a source of teachers.
Yeah.
So like people who have an issue with TFA, like fighting with TFA or complaining about TFA is actually not the person you need to direct your issue to, or you help, like you said, because like I will be in complete transparency. I do a lot of adjunct work at different universities, and one of the universities I'm not teaching at this semester because there's not enough education students. And so that is like the reality here is that people saw what happened to teachers during the pandemic. They saw teachers go from being the superheroes because like take our kids back to the school building. And then once they got snatched back, fix them yesterday. And so when people are seeing that, people are like, I don't know if education is for me. And so people are not coming into the pipeline. So I think, audience, I think your takeaway is, regardless of how you feel, is like, how do we get people, regardless of their pathways, to want to be educators and then stay in the classroom? And for my help, I would hope they would stay for more than 2 years. When I became a school administrator, people were like, you have taught for how many years? I taught for a long time before I was a school administrator. And that is not the case a lot of times. And sometimes people don't understand. Sometimes people become a school administrator because all the teachers around them don't have much experience. So you may be the most senior person there. So I was an oddball going in. I think I had like 13 years of experience before I became an administrator, which most of the people I was working with at the time didn't have that much experience. I would get on a little box.
Well, and honestly, I think both are needed, right? Like I think I'm the other side of the coin in a sense of like I taught for about 4 years, a little over 4 years. Let's say 5 if I include like my kind of like instructional coaching kind of space. I was still kind of co-teaching. And then from there, I became a dean for a year, became an assistant principal for 2 years, and I became a principal by the time I was like 28. So like I get what you're saying on the other side of the coin. And one thing that I used to always push or really just be thoughtful of is, so I was always thoughtful of my age. In the sense of like I understood like I was leading a space with educators who were very seasoned and had a lot of knowledge to give to the game that I was a sponge of. Right. I think luckily with my age, though, I have a lot of grays in my beard. So they used to help me out a little bit. They thought I was a lot older. But honestly, I think, age or not, I think a lot of people just have to be open to, just the knowledge and the wisdom that's around them. And I think that's really excelled and pushed me as an individual leader. But honestly, that's something we're very thoughtful of, even at the TFA office, because again, ultimately, we are a leadership development organization. So like, yeah, we care about your time in the classroom and staying there as long as possible. But if you are in a position to say like, hey, I want to continue to grow in my career, that's a conversation we're going to continue to have and think like, well, what does that next step look like for you?
And talking about that next step, because you mentioned many times that TFA is a leadership organization. So when people, because as you said, you were a TFA alum and then you came back to the organization in the role you are now.
Yeah.
So what ways does TFA help people develop as leaders into, as you said, educational and J6 spaces? And like, what things can people do if they, because in my mind, I'm thinking like, some people may go to TFA because they, the recruiter talks to them. They are passionate, like you said, like you went to Arlington, because Arlington was my boundary high school. I didn't go there because of deseg busing, but you went there, you saw it. I want to be a part of the solution to the problem. Yeah. But then the other side is some people, like when I was in education, I was in class with people like, oh, I'm about to be a principal. I'm like, we haven't even got out of student teaching. You about to be a principal? So some people seek out organizations because they want to climb the ladder. Yeah. And that's kind of taboo to even talk about in education, because it's like, climb the ladder, we don't say that. So what can people do if they get in TFA, they do their 2-year commitment, and they want to continue to be developed as a leader?
Yeah, and just before I answer that, I'll go back to the taboo piece. Like if somebody youthful in the TFA world caring about them being a school administrator early in their career, because again, I did it kind of early, so I'm not knocking them for that energy. But for me, one thing I really cared about, and some advice I got early on in that pursuit was, your data's got to be impeccable. Like, let's be very clear. Like, if you're going to be a young leader, you want to grow others and be a teacher, coach, instructional coach, and AP, and so on. Like, you got to know what you're talking about. And most times the proof is in the pudding. Like, how was your data in your classroom? Like, and again, growth is beautiful as well. We can always talk about growth. But let's also talk about that proficiency and like just what were student outcomes and how were you growing kids? So like for me, young leaders or more vet leaders, I'm just looking for the data, and I'm looking for like consistent data over time. Like, how did that go? But to your point about like, what does that look like? Like we're literally, one thing we do at the end of their core experience is we just meet with them about like, hey, what's next? And to your point, some of them say like, hey, I'm about to move to California and go back home. I get that. But most are saying like, hey, I really want to go to a school who has X, Y, and Z values that align to where I want to be. And we work with them to just, apply, get their resume built, all those kind of things. But we also have great fellowships through our LEAD fellowship, our Leaders of Educational Equity. So that's a lot of fellowships that's going to get people around like the state house and a lot of policy, maybe around like some school board elections, things like that. So it's going to be more like the policy side of things. We have an awesome fellowship called our Green Fellowship. So that's going to be a great opportunity for people to, if they choose to stay teaching in classrooms. So this is the new commitment after their 2-year commitment called the Green Fellowship. They do their 2-year commitment and to say like, hey, I want to continue to teach, but I want to also add an extra layer of impact for my school and my community. So there's this impact project that they're going to complete by the end of their 2 years, mostly typically based on some kind of project in the school, like whether it's like we want to overhaul our like parent advocacy group. Hey, we want to do more work around like our special education population or EL population, so parents understand their rights and want to just get the support that they need, etc. So we even had 15 Green Fellows this year, so really excited about that. So we just meet with them, and then we think about our network of 800 alum and think like, if you say you want to go do X, Y, and Z, who do we know that's in that space that we can connect you to just, dig deeper into that desire of yours?
Well, thanks for sharing about that fellowship. That kind of reminds me of Teach Plus at a time. When I was in IPS, they had a fellowship where you could do an impact project if you did a certain fellowship with them. So I think that's pretty cool. And I actually did one of those where I got to do a little impact project. And I think many times people want to do the thing, but they need that extra training and that coaching to kind of help you kind of lead that. So that was actually pretty interesting. But that also leads into my next question. Yeah. In particular, talking about Indy, what are some wins or successes that you want to lift up about TFA in particular in Indy?
Yeah, honestly, a few things. One is I'm really just excited about the humans in the work, honestly, like the people. It's the people that make a space. It's the people that propels the work, right? So when I think around like who those 800 alum are, and I think about the positions that they hold in the city and the influence that they have, like it's really a like huge kudos to those who are more committed to the work than people might give them credit for. Like I think around like the number of school leaders in the city. I think around like the leadership in the IPS the executive leadership at IPS. You know, like you think about the superintendent, you think around the deputy superintendent. Those are TFA alums. You know, like we could literally go down the list of people who sit in positions throughout the city, and like you'd be surprised how many of them in a good way are TFA connected. So we're just really proud of that. You know, we're really proud of like having like-minded people in spheres of influence in the city. That's beautiful for us. Two, really excited about like our ability to just continue to grow more leaders. Like I think around like my path to school leadership, and TFA put me in a position. They sent me to Columbia University in New York to get my admin license, and you know, that would have never been a reality for me without the support of Teach for America. And that's a program that went away for a second, but we're excited to bring that back. So we're not using Columbia, but we are using some of our local partners via Marion or UND, et cetera, just to make sure that we can continue to support alum in getting their admin license. Just because, again, we think school leadership is a key lever to ensuring that we get to 2030.
And I'll shout out the Marion Admin Program because I did the Marion Admin Program, and what I loved about it, guess free promotion, Marion,
Yeah.
is they have this part where they talk about that we do a lot of heart work, and that sounds silly to people, but a lot of times people get into leadership for the wrong reasons, and so we did a lot of work about like addressing who you are as a person, why are you in this work, and really doing the deep dive. So if you're interested in that type of inner work, I strongly suggest the Marion program because you know, it helps you decide why am I here, because if you don't really know your why, then that kind of impacts how you lead other people. So that is just a plus there. But as we come to a close on our show, what do you say to people right now? Because I do a lot of talking to young people because I want people to become teachers. And a lot of times I went to a job fair out of school. It was like a job fair, career day thing. And one of the people said, you know, we've never really had an educator here before. And that really kind of stabbed me in my little heart, because a lot of time when we have these career days, we don't have teachers at the career days. So you have every other single job, but the one job that kids are around day in and day out. So speaking to people who maybe they're late in their career, they may be thinking about teaching, or there are young people, because we do have some young people that watch our show. What would you say to them if they're considering teaching, whether that's going the pathway of TFA or any pathway? What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, honestly, I start the conversation with I want you to think about who your favorite teacher was. K-12, you know, college, coach, whatever. And I want you to think around like how that person made you feel. You know, what are the life lessons that they instilled in you? You know, what makes them so special and so unique to you? And then I automatically think and know that I tell them like, hey, you can be that for somebody else instantly. Like, you know, like just your presence in spaces makes a big difference in the outcomes for students. You know, because if you are in that position, if you are in that seat, you are that kid's best chance that day to have an awesome education. You know, and it's more than just teaching. Like you are literally, you become coaches, you become life, somebody who guides them through life. You become somebody who they're looking up as mentors and role models. Like, so it's so much more than the academics. Though the academics matter, it was truly my North Star, still is my North Star in my day-to-day work. Like, you know, what is the data saying about kids' outcomes? But more than that, you know, kids are obviously humans and people, and you know, we all are. So you are going to grow amazing connections with some awesome people, and they need you. So you know, that's some good pressure to feel that need, but it's also even a better feeling to meet that need and answer the call. So come join this work.
Well, Darius, I think we're going to wrap up the show there. And thank you for that. And if you are out there and you're teachers, like take that little part of it, show it to your students, because that's the one thing when people ask me to come to talk to kids about being teachers, you will have me there in a heartbeat, because I'm very, very passionate about getting more kids to come and be part of the education system, because we need them and we need you. So well, Darius, you have been a wonderful guest this evening, and thank you so much for joining us on EdGems this month.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the invite. Excited. I'll definitely continue to be a viewer and a partner. So just thanks for having me.